going to talk about textbook inaccuracies. There is a lot of stuff in our textbooks that are teaching our children things that just aren't accurate. It's so much that oftentimes we feel like this rabbit here, that we are being attacked from every direction. There is no hope. But if you really want to know what truth is this: we win. Okay, because we have truth on our side. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And when we're looking at textbooks, the key to understanding truth is going to be to make sure that you're using the Scriptures as your worldview, your foundation. Colossians 2 tells us that all wisdom and knowledge are hidden in Christ Jesus. And that's why it's so important for our children to understand Christ in their education, because all truth and knowledge are hidden in Christ Jesus. Without that foundation, there really isn't any wisdom that can be gained out of it. You can get knowledge. You can get your ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, even get your PhDs, but the fool says in his heart, there is no God. So without Christ, all that knowledge, we don't know how to apply it to life. And that's part of the issue here. Now, if one were to prove this God of the Christians to us, we should be even less able to believe in Him, said Nietzsche. I think there's a lot of truth in that. If we could prove God's existence or prove God to people, then I wouldn't want to believe in Him, because that makes Him a very small God. If we can wrap our minds around this omnipotent Creator, it makes Him a very small God. Agnostics, they often accuse us as being empty-minded, right? Closed-minded. Well, the question that I'd like to ask them is, are you open-minded? No, they're not. The bottom line is when we attack things that are in the science textbooks today, we're closed-minded, we're religious, we're just this or that. I would say they're the ones that are not open-minded. See, I want to teach my kids about evolution in the textbooks. I want them to know evolution. I want them to know creation as well. I'm just going to say that evolution is wrong, creation is right, based not only on the Bible, but on what science says. And we just don't want to be so open-minded that our brains fall out. All right? We just have to have a discerning eye to the information that's in textbooks. Given enough time, do you think natural laws could produce what we see today in science? Well, no. There's just no way. Time, though, is always the hero for an evolutionist. Add more time, then you're going to have, the ability for evolution to take place. We use the analogy, if you would cut up a picture, put it into maybe 10 pieces, 10 even squares, put it in a bag or a bucket, and go stand on top of a 6-foot ladder and then shake those things out and let the picture form on the ground. How many times are you going to have to do that until you get your picture to form? It's never going to happen, is it? Well, given enough time. Well, the problem is when we're dealing with organic stuff and DNA, time is an enemy. A good way to illustrate that, because of mutations and things the second law of thermodynamics, things wearing out, the more time, the more harm that can take place. It's like now taking that bucket and go standing on top of your roof and shaking it out. Are you going to get closer to the possibility of getting your picture back? No. How about take it up in an airplane and now dump it out? No, the further you go, the more time you give it, the more time for chaos and disorder to take place. And so this idea of time, technically, is an enemy of evolution, not a friend. Truth is truth, regardless of what we believe. But in our society, we've got so many people twisting truth, saying things like this: well, it's true for you, but it's not true for me. Well, that's not truth. Truth is true for everybody, regardless. But they are so inconsistent. Things like, don't judge me. Well, and then telling me that I can't judge them, you know what they just did? Judged me. Right? These are the kind of inconsistent statements that are being made. There's no such thing as truth. Is that true? You see, even the statement itself is false. Because if there is no such thing as truth, then that statement can't even be proven to be true. These are some of the inconsistencies that we see. Now, I'm pointing this out. We're talking about textbook inaccuracies, but this is the kind of illogical reasoning that is used oftentimes in textbooks, as you're going to see here. Like I said, sometimes we feel like this rabbit, but the truth does come out when we take the time to look at it. Let me ask you this. Anybody here think that teachers or textbooks should be allowed to deliberately lie to students? Of course not. No, we shouldn't be able to lie to students. Well, do you know that there are laws in almost every state to make sure that your students, your children and grandchildren are not going to be lied to? Wisconsin has Administrative Code 361, which says the textbooks need to be factually accurate. Alabama has a code that says that textbooks should be adequate and current. Texas says instructional materials are to be factual. Theories should be clearly distinguished from facts. Florida, all instructional materials shall be accurate. We have California, textbooks should be factually accurate with current and confirmed research. Yet, you know what's interesting about this? Is that when textbooks are being challenged when it comes to the theory of evolution, teachers are fired. They lose their tenure. They're pressured to leave. This has happened time and time again throughout the country. I'm not going to get into all the examples of it, but we can look at Iowa State to all around the country where people have lost their jobs because they challenged evolution with current and confirmed research without even touching the Bible, a Bible verse, or mentioning the word God. I'm not talking intelligent design. We're just talking science that goes against the theory of evolution, against the theory of the Big Bang. They don't like to talk about the problems of evolution. They just want to shove it down our throats to make us say that it's real, it happens. And if you question us, you're going down. So it doesn't matter. These laws, even though they're good laws, aren't protecting us. In Minnesota, we see a teacher shall not deliberately suppress or distort subject matter. Well, how about this then? Is there anyone here who thinks that teachers or textbooks should be allowed to use outdated or false information just to get students to believe their theory? No. Nobody in their right mind is going to say, yeah, we should be able to do that, but that's what's happening. And I say that this is a very dangerous presentation for teachers, because I'm going to show you some things here that if you are going to teach your kids now that you know the truth, then you should be held accountable. How many of you think that teachers who deliberately lie to our students, our children, should be fired? Yeah, me too. A lot of people, I don't know. Hey, if they're going to deliberately lie, now I am by no means saying that everybody who teaches evolution is deliberately lying to their kids. They're not. Some of them don't know any better. They really believe this themselves. And that's why I say this is dangerous, because when I show you some of these things that are in our textbooks and you find out that they're not true, you should be held accountable if you're going to continue to teach them. That's why this is dangerous for you. Anybody here think textbooks with lies should be banned, or at least the lies torn out? I do. But again, many people, we don't want to teach our kids to deface the textbooks. You know what? When I was a teacher, if there was a math book and the math book said 2 plus 2 was 6, I told the kids, hey, turn to page 34, number 4 there, scratch out that answer and put the right one in. How come we can't do it with our science textbooks then? It's no different. Well, what's happened is that we have been programmed to believe that that textbook isn't lying to us. If I were to ask you, what's 5 plus 5? And I said, but wait, before you answer, you can't say 10. Now, you're not allowed to use sign language. Okay, you can't use other languages. You can't say diez or any of those kind of things. You can't use foreign languages. You can't use combinations of adding and subtracting, multiplying and dividing. You can't use base rhythms, logarithms, or anything like that. What is 5 plus 5? 48? You bet. 93? I'll accept that. 1,523? Sure, why not? You see what's happened? When we've removed the only possible explanation for truth, anything but truth has become acceptable. And that is where we are in our textbooks. When we challenge evolution, and the only possible explanation is an intelligent designer named Jesus, but when we remove that only possible truthful answer, anything but truth becomes acceptable. And that's what's happening. Let me show you here this textbook. Now, this is a Holt Biology 2001 textbook, so it's old, but it's only gotten worse. You're going to see some more modern textbooks, but it only gets worse. Can you see here outlined in red, all of these pages are dedicated to teaching your kids evolution. That is a lot of this textbook trying to teach evolution, over a third of that book. So what I want to do is I'm going to show you how they're teaching this idea of evolution through word recognition. If we train our kids to have a discerning mind, to recognize certain words, it's going to be helpful. Look at this. Monitor comprehension. Make generalizations. A generalization is a broad statement. It combines facts in a selection with what a reader already knows to tell what is true. You know what this textbook is admitting? Everybody has a worldview. You have to take the data, the facts, and you're going to interpret that data based on something you already know to be true. That's called a worldview, a presupposition, something you're bringing in to the classroom before the professor says a word. And so our children need to have a strong biblical worldview before they sit down in that desk in the classroom. Because everybody has a worldview. It will either be a godly one or an ungodly one. Here, scientific theory. A scientific theory is an explanation of observation or events that is based on knowledge gained from many observations and investigations. Now, I would agree with that. It's based on observations. That's a key word to look for. And it's a key word to ask yourself when you're looking in a textbook. Has this been observed? Who's seen this? Have we been able to apply our senses, smell, sight, hearing, taste, and touch, to investigate this? If you can't, then it's not observation. It's not science without an observation. It's not at all. The solar nebula in this textbook says, a solar system formed from a cloud of gas, ice, and dust called a nebula. Gravity pulled the material closer together. The nebula shrank and flattened into a disk. The disk began to rotate. Then it goes next, the planets began to take shape as gravity pulled these small particles together. Let me ask you, does this sound like a theory or a fact? It sounds like somebody actually observed this, doesn't it? Train your children to look for observational facts and theories that are pulled out of the sky. Because this is presented as a fact, even though it isn't. When the ancient earth started melting, something much like this happened. The densest material sank, formed the innermost layer of the earth. The least dense material also stayed at the surface. Now, who was there watching this happen? Nobody. Again, it's stated as if it's a fact. It's stated as if we know 100% this is what it does, when we don't know that. Now, can we do scientific explanations to see how denser things will, sink to the bottom? Absolutely, we can. But there's still an assumption brought into this. They're assuming that the earth was formed over millions of years and you had a long time to have this happen. That's an assumption, not an observation. And the Bible would indicate the exact opposite, that these things formed quickly. By the way, science can also back that up in other areas of granite and whatnot, but we're not going to get into that right now. Look here. The word prehistoric is used oftentimes in textbook. Another word recognition, prehistoric. Can anybody name something prehistoric for me? Yeah, dinosaurs, woolly mammoths, okay, saber-toothed tigers, things like that are often brought up, right? Well, that word prehistoric shouldn't even be in our textbooks. That word was invented to make you think about long periods of time. The word pre means before, historic, history. Prehistoric. Well, my Bible records history from the beginning. There's no such thing as prehistoric. But as soon as that word is said, in the minds of almost every adult and child today, something like a dinosaur or something, very ancient pops up in their minds. When in fact, the Bible says the earth is just a few thousand years old. There is no such thing as prehistoric. This is a brainwashing term. Now, I've said it before in other presentations, but the bottom line is every one of us has been brainwashed. There's no question about it. We've been taught sports builds character. And sports, especially in a small town like this, sports are important. We want our kids to be in sports because of the character building, that goes on in athletics. But again, this is a lie. If sports builds character, then the NFL and the NBA ought to be the most character-filled people in our country. They're characters, but very few have character. And if they do have character, it's typically because they're Christians. So, again, I'm not against sports. Go ahead and play them, watch them, love them. Just don't believe the lie that they build character. They don't. But we hear things so often it becomes truth to you. Sports builds character. People agree with it because you've heard it so many times. Prehistoric. People believe it because you've heard it so many times. Maybe it's time we start thinking before we just believe everything we're told and everything that we read or hear. Here in McGraw-Hill, you need to watch for words like this: believe, may have, might have, perhaps, could have. These are those words that you need to recognize. Here we see that this guy was digging on a place there in Choteau, Montana, when he stumbled upon the new dinosaur species. When it goes on and it says it belongs to a dinosaur family that most scientists believe are the ancestors of birds. Up here in the left corner, it may also have had feathers. That's how things can be written as theories. But again, when you teach your children to recognize those words, might have, possibly, maybe, could have, should have, that's not science then. All right? There's a difference. It's not observable. This is their worldview interpreting the data. The data is science. The worldview, not. Now keep in mind, Christians are in the same boat. I'm bringing in this worldview. When I look at that data, you know what that worldview is called? Faith. Whether you are a Christian or a non-Christian, everybody has faith. It's just a matter of which faith is the best faith to have faith in. But everybody, Christians or non, bring in faith to the science classroom. The only difference is we're not allowed to have faith. They can, but we can't. Why? For no other reason than their faith says there is no God. Bottom line. How about the Grand Canyon? You know, two people can look at the same canyon and come up with two very different interpretations of the canyon. Why? Because of that faith, that worldview that we bring in. This textbook says over millions of years, the Colorado River carved out the Grand Canyon from solid rock. Well, the fact is that you can look, there is indeed a canyon there. And that canyon has many layers of sedimentary rock in it. That's science. Those are the facts. But now those same scientific facts are going to be interpreted by your worldview. If you are a creationist, you're going to say, I